All right, so if there's a surplus, again, businesses will lower their price and then wait to see what happens. So if they were to lower their price, and we're going to say they lower it to this point right here, you'll notice as we have the graph, we can see that this price is now lower than equilibrium. But again, businesses don't have all this information necessarily, so they're going to wait to see what happens. So again, we want to know what's happening to quantity, what's happening to supply and demand at this price. So this red point right here is on the supply curve, so that would make it quantity supplied. And this blue point is on the demand curve, so that would make it quantity demanded. So again, we look at this and say, well, how does supply compare to demand? Well, in this case, at this price, there is more demand than supply. There's less supply than demand. Okay. We call that a shortage. Okay. What that means is that there are more consumers showing up demanding the product than there is product available. Okay. Every time price is set below equilibrium, it's going to cause a shortage. Okay. Now, for businesses, when they notice, hey, we are turning customers away that don't have the product, we don't have enough to meet demand, that's their signal that they're in a shortage. Sometimes they know they are, and sometimes they may not know they are, right? Depending on what the issues are. Okay, but that lower price, the reason we see a shortage existing is because that lower price sends a signal to businesses, you're closer to cost, you're not making as much profit, and so they supply less. For consumers, we look at this and say, hey, prices are lower, we're getting a better deal, we can afford more of it, and so more people show up and demand the product. Okay, and that's why you see that gap between the two. So when businesses notice that there is a shortage, the only incentive they have to produce more is if they could make more money, and you only make more money is if you have a higher price. So what we see happening when there's a shortage is that the prices are going to go up. Okay, that's what's going to happen. That's how you fix that. Okay, so right now, as we're looking at things going on in the economy, there's a lot of shortages taking place because it's difficult right now to get product to stores. Okay, and so demand is still high, supply has decreased because they can't get it there, right? And so that's one of the reasons we're seeing shortages in different areas. Okay, now that higher price sends a signal to consumers, though, you now have to pay more, and so the quantity demanded will go down, and that's how we adjust and get closer to that equilibrium. Okay, so a shortage is always going to cause a price increase. Okay, so as long as you can remember that and you know, okay, if this were to happen, I know how prices will change, you can use that to your advantage. Okay, we're going to practice reading the graph here real quick and see what's happening at this price. So if the price were set at 75, we're trying to figure out, are we having a shortage or a surplus? So we notice that this is equilibrium. $50 would be equilibrium. Okay, so we're clearly above that. So we want to know what's happening between quantity supplied and quantity demanded. So the formula that we use is quantity supplied minus quantity demanded. So not only will this tell us if we have a shortage or a surplus, this will tell us how much of a shortage or a surplus we will have. So what we do is look at this and say, okay, how does 75, how much is being supplied? So we got to see all the way over to the supply curve and see where does that connect with $75. So that's at 60. And how much is being demanded? So on our demand curve, where does that touch $75? That's right there. That's 20. Okay, so when we take 60 minus 20, we end up with 40. Okay, so since this is a positive number, we know that that's a surplus. Okay, a positive number tells us there's extra product. There are 40 extra units of whatever this product is that are going unsold. So businesses can then take that information and say, okay, we need to change our prices to get rid of these 40 products. Okay, and then they'll adjust and they'll figure that out. Okay, so if they have an extra amount, prices are always going to drop. Okay, we can also use the market schedule to figure out what's happening. If we don't need graphs to figure out what's happening all the time. So if we were looking at this information here, so we have toasters we're looking at. We have the price for toasters, we have the amount being supplied and the amount being demanded. So we've already looked at this here and said, okay, $30 is equilibrium. But if we look at all these other prices, the prices that go from 45 to 35 and 25 to 15, again, compare supply to demand. So if we look at this and say, okay, at $45, supply is greater than demand. At $40, supply is greater than demand. 18 is greater than 7. At $25, 7 is less than 18, 6 is less than 30, and 5 is less than 50. Okay, if you can remember that and say, oh, I know quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, I know that these are all surpluses and these are all shortages. Okay, if you can't remember that, you can always do the math and say, okay, I'm going to take quantity supplied minus quantity demanded, and what does that give me? So this is a plus 45. Okay, so if you go through the rest and you do those calculations, it's 30 minus 6, 18 minus 7, 10 minus 10, 7 minus 18, 6 minus 30, and 5 minus 50. What you're going to end up with are these numbers here. Okay, so where you get 0, that's your equilibrium. If you didn't already know that, then that can tell you that this is your equilibrium. If you get a positive number, okay, all of these are positive here. That's telling you that there are extra products. So at $40, there are 24 extra toasters unsold sitting on the shelf. Okay. If you get a negative number, that tells you you were short this many units. Okay. So that would be a shortage. Okay. So at $15, there are 45 units of or people or toasters that people wanted to buy that they could not supply. And so people walked away. Shortages are really bad for businesses because if they continuously run a shortage, not only will people temporarily go somewhere else for the product, but eventually they'll stop coming back to that business at all and they'll permanently lose customers. Okay, so businesses really want to know, are we running a shortage? Are we have a surplus so that they can help avoid some of those bigger problems? Okay, what I'm going to have you do is go to the last video and we're going to make a cheat sheet to figure out what happens, what predictions can we make when these things change. So go ahead and go to the last video for today's lesson.